A secret power struggle is unfolding inside the Vatican, and Pope Francis has just made a move that could change everything. At the center of it all, Cardinal Luis Tagle, a rising force in the Catholic Church, a man some believe is being groomed to be the next pope, but not everyone supports his rise. With deep divisions between reformists and traditionalists, the battle for the future of the Church is now heating up. But is it true that he really can be the one to take the papal throne? Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle isn't just another high-ranking clergyman. He is a figure who has captivated millions with his humility, intelligence, and deep connection to the people. Born in Manila, Philippines in 1957, Tagle grew up in a devout Catholic family. From an early age, he displayed an extraordinary ability to connect with people from all walks of life. His warmth, compassion, and ability to break down complex theological ideas into simple, heartfelt messages quickly made him stand out. After years of studying theology and serving in various roles within the Church, he was appointed Archbishop of Manila in 2011. This was a turning point in his career. Unlike many high-ranking officials who distanced themselves from the public, Tagle was known for his emotional, relatable sermons. He often spoke with tears in his eyes, sharing the struggles of the poor and marginalized. His ability to convey deep emotions and remain accessible to ordinary people earned him the nickname Asia's Francis. His popularity didn't go unnoticed. Within a year, Pope Benedict XIV appointed him a cardinal, placing him in the spotlight of global Catholicism. Many saw this as a sign of his growing influence, but it was Pope Francis who truly recognized his potential. The two shared a vision of a more inclusive, compassionate church, and their bond only grew stronger over the years. Tagle's rise has been swift, and his influence continues to expand. But in the Vatican, power comes with enemies. While millions admire him, some powerful forces are working behind the scenes to prevent his ascension. Why? Because Tagle represents change, and change is something the traditionalists in the Vatican fear more than anything else. The Red Pope promotion, Tagle's rise to power. For centuries, the Catholic Church has been dominated by European leadership, with the papacy historically reserved for those from the West. But in 2019, Pope Francis made a decision that shocked many. He appointed Cardinal Luis Tagle as the head of the Congregation for the Evangelization of Peoples, one of the most influential positions in the Vatican. This move sent a clear message. Tagle was no ordinary cardinal. He was being positioned for something far greater. The Congregation for the Evangelization of Peoples, often referred to as Propaganda Fide, is responsible for missionary work across the globe. The position has long been seen as a stepping stone to even greater influence, with its leader sometimes being referred to as the Red Pope, due to the power they wield. By placing Tagle in this role, Pope Francis was effectively giving him control over the future of Catholic expansion in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, regions where Catholicism is growing at an unprecedented rate. Why did Pope Francis choose Tagle? The answer lies in their shared vision. Both men believe the Church should focus more on helping the poor and marginalized rather than clinging to outdated traditions. Pope Francis has long criticized the rigid hierarchy within the Vatican, and Tagle embodies the kind of leadership that prioritizes compassion over doctrine. However, this appointment also made Tagle a target. His rapid rise didn't sit well with many within the Church's conservative circles. Some viewed him as too progressive, too emotional, and even too close to Pope Francis. The whispers of discontent began almost immediately. The Vatican power struggle. Enemies within the Church. Tagle's appointment as the head of the Congregation for the Evangelization of Peoples wasn't just about missionary work. It was about shifting power within the Vatican. And that didn't go unnoticed by the conservative forces inside the Church. For centuries, the Catholic Church has been a battleground between progressives who push for modernization and traditionalists who want to preserve its old ways. Pope Francis, with his focus on social justice, inclusivity, and reform, has been a controversial figure from the start. But now, with Tagle's increasing influence, the tensions within the Vatican have reached new heights. The resistance to Tagle is driven by several key factors. First, his emphasis on outreach to the poor and marginalized has led some conservative bishops to believe he is straying too far from the doctrinal focus of the Church. They argue that his approach, which prioritizes empathy over rigid church law, could weaken. Second, there are political motivations at play. Many in the Vatican's inner circle have long held influence over financial and administrative matters. With Tagle rising in prominence, some fear that he and Pope Francis could push for reforms that would disrupt long-standing power structures. Then there's the issue of culture. The idea of a non-European pope is still unsettling to many inside the Vatican. While Pope Francis broke tradition by being the first Latin American pope, the election of an Asian pope would be an even greater shift. Pope Francis has never hidden his belief that the Catholic Church must evolve to remain relevant in an ever-changing world. But recently, his statements and actions have led to growing speculation. Could he be preparing to step down? If so, is Cardinal Luis Tagle the chosen successor? The possibility of Pope Francis resigning has been a topic of discussion, especially as his health has visibly declined in recent years. At 87 years old, he has hinted on multiple occasions that he does not intend to remain in power until his last breath, breaking from the centuries-old tradition of popes serving for life. The last time a pope resigned was in 2013 when Pope Benedict XVI made history by stepping down, paving the way for Francis. If Pope Francis follows the same path, the decision on his successor will fall to the College of Cardinals, who will elect the next leader of the Catholic Church. Many insiders believe that Francis has been quietly positioning Tagle as his ideal replacement, not only by giving him powerful Vatican roles, but also by expanding his influence globally. Tagle embodies everything Pope Francis has advocated for: humility, a deep connection with the poor, and a church that prioritizes compassion over rigid doctrine. His rise through the ranks has been rapid, and his ability to connect with people across different cultures makes him an attractive candidate. However, his progressive stance on many issues has also made him controversial among conservatives, who see him as a continuation of Francis' reforms. But Tagle isn't the only one in the running. There's another powerful figure who stands as his biggest obstacle: Cardinal Pietro Parolin. As the Vatican's Secretary of State, Parolin represents the conservative wing of the Church, making him a strong contender for the papacy. The battle for the future of the Vatican is shaping up to be a clash of ideologies, and the stakes couldn't be higher. The rivalry between Tagle and Cardinal Pietro Parolin. In the race to become the next pope, two names keep coming up: Cardinal Luis Tagle and Cardinal Pietro Parolin. While Tagle represents a vision of reform and outreach, Parolin stands for tradition and structure. These two men are not just competitors, they are symbols of two opposing forces within the Catholic Church. Parolin, who has served as the Vatican's Secretary of State since 2013, is a highly influential figure in the Church's bureaucracy. Known for his diplomatic skills, he has built strong relationships with world leaders and represents the old guard Catholics who favor stability over drastic reform. Unlike Tagle, who is seen as a pastoral leader connected to the people, Parolin is a master of Vatican politics. His conservative approach appeals to those who believe the Church should maintain its traditional power structures rather than embracing modern reforms. Many within the Vatican see Parolin as the safer choice. His experience in diplomacy and governance means he would likely continue many of the traditional policies that have defined the Church for centuries. He also has strong backing from European and Italian cardinals, who still hold significant influence in the papal election process. The idea of an Italian pope, after two traditionalists, would welcome. However, Tagle's growing influence cannot be ignored. He is widely loved among Catholics in developing countries, particularly in Asia and Africa, where the faith is expanding rapidly. His leadership style aligns with Pope Francis' vision of a more inclusive church, which appeals to younger generations and progressive clergy members. While Parolin is respected within the Vatican, he does not command the same level of global popularity that Tagle does. This brewing rivalry is more than just a personal contest. It represents a deeper ideological struggle over the future of the Catholic Church. Will the next pope continue Francis's vision of reform, or will the Church revert to its traditional hierarchical structure? The battle lines have been drawn, and the next papal conclave will determine which path the Vatican takes. The future of the Vatican, who will lead? The next papal election could be one of the most consequential in modern history. Pope Francis has reshaped the Catholic Church in ways no one expected, shifting its focus toward the poor, marginalized, and disenfranchised. But the question remains, will his successor continue this legacy, or will the Church take a more conservative turn? The answer depends on who is chosen as the next pope. If Cardinal Tagle is elected, the Catholic Church could see an era of increased openness, social justice, and modernization. His leadership would likely focus on expanding the Church's reach in developing nations, promoting interfaith dialogue, and continuing Pope Francis's fight against clericalism and corruption within the Vatican. His vision aligns with a more inclusive Church, one that moves away from strict doctrinal rigidity and toward a message of mercy and compassion. However, there is strong opposition to this vision. Many conservative cardinals believe the Church has already moved too far in a progressive direction under Francis and are eager to restore a more traditional approach. If Cardinal Parolin or another conservative candidate is elected, we could see a reversal of some of the reforms introduced under Francis. The Vatican might focus more on maintaining traditional doctrine, reinforcing the hierarchical power structure, and emphasizing theological purity over social activism. The power dynamics in the upcoming papal conclave will be complex. Historically, European cardinals have held significant influence over the selection process, and if they favor a more traditional candidate, it could work against Tagle's chances. However, the growing Catholic populations in Africa, Asia, and Latin America could push for a leader who represents their regions, giving Tagle a significant advantage. The world is watching. Whoever becomes the next pope will shape the direction of the Church for decades to come. Will it be Tagle, the reformer, leading the Church into a new era? Or will the Vatican retreat into tradition, with a conservative leader at its helm? The future of Catholicism hangs in the balance. The silent battle for the soul of the Catholic Church. Behind the Vatican's grand traditions, a quiet but intense power struggle is unfolding. On one side are the reformists, led by Pope Francis and Cardinal Luis Tagle, who envision a more open, people-centered church. On the other side are conservative traditionalists, who fear these changes are eroding the Church's core identity. For centuries, the Catholic Church maintained strict hierarchies, with popes ruling unchallenged and doctrine remaining unchanged. Pope Francis disrupted this by decentralizing power and emphasizing social justice, a shift that has thrilled progressives but unsettled conservatives. Tagle, as a champion of this movement, has become a lightning rod for controversy. His opponents argue that the Church is losing its theological foundations under Francis and Tagle's leadership. They believe that modernization efforts, such as increased interfaith dialogue and decentralization, threaten the Church's traditional teachings. On the other hand, supporters see Tagle as a bridge between Catholicism's past and future, someone who can make the faith more relevant to younger generations and non-Western communities. As Pope Francis nears the end of his papacy, this internal battle is intensifying. The upcoming papal conclave will determine whether the Church continues its path of reform or reverts to a more traditional model. The stakes couldn't be higher. Pope Francis's recent moves, a final clue? Pope Francis has never openly endorsed a successor, but his actions suggest he is shaping the Church for a leader who will continue his vision. In recent years, he has appointed several progressive cardinals, many of whom align with his ideology and could influence the next papal election. In late 2023, Francis made a statement emphasizing that the future of Catholicism lies in Asia, a comment that many saw as a nod to Cardinal Tagle. He also restructured Vatican offices to prioritize evangelization and global outreach, both key areas of Tagle's expertise. At the same time, Francis has spoken about the need for a more decentralized church, possibly as a warning against those who want to restore old hierarchies. Whether these moves are enough to secure Tagle's path to the papacy remains uncertain, but one thing is clear: the battle over the church's future is far from settled. If Tagle becomes pope, how will the church change? If Cardinal Luis Tagle is elected as the next pope, the Catholic Church could see a significant transformation in both its leadership style and global priorities. Tagle, like Pope Francis, represents a vision of a church that is less focused on rigid traditions and more engaged with the real-world struggles of its followers. His leadership would likely emphasize social justice, inclusivity, and a stronger connection with the people, particularly in developing nations where Catholicism is rapidly growing. One of the key changes under a Tagle-led papacy could be an even greater push toward decentralizing Vatican authority. Pope Francis has already started this process, but Tagle, with his background in outreach and evangelization, might take it even further. He could give more autonomy to bishops and regional Catholic communities, allowing them to address local issues more effectively rather than strictly following centralized Vatican mandates. Another major shift could be in the Church's approach to interfaith dialogue. Tagle has been an outspoken advocate for building relationships with other religious communities, particularly in Asia, where Catholicism exists alongside Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism. As Pope, he could take steps to strengthen these relationships and promote religious harmony on a global scale. Additionally, Tagle is known for his progressive stance on social issues, particularly regarding poverty, migration, and humanitarian aid. Under his leadership, the Vatican could become even more vocal in advocating for refugees, economic justice, and climate action, areas where Pope Francis has already set a precedent. However, his papacy would not be without challenges. Conservative factions within the Church would likely resist many of these changes, arguing that they stray too far from Catholic tradition. If Tagle becomes pope, he will need to balance his vision for reform with maintaining unity within a deeply divided church. The question remains, can he navigate these challenges and truly bring the church into a new era? The backlash against Tagle and Francis' vision. While many see Cardinal Tagle as a beacon of hope for a more modern and inclusive Catholic Church, not everyone is in favor of his rise. In fact, there is strong resistance from conservative factions that believe the Church has already drifted too far from its core doctrines under Pope Francis. These groups argue that further liberalization could weaken Catholic identity, dilute its teachings, and create divisions within the faith. One of the biggest criticisms of Tagle is that he is seen as too soft on key doctrinal issues. Traditionalist cardinals and bishops fear that his approach to leadership, one that prioritizes compassion and inclusivity, could undermine long-held Catholic teachings on topics such as marriage, gender roles, and church authority. They argue that while outreach is important, the Church must remain firm in its theological foundations. Additionally, many within the Vatican's bureaucracy view Tagle as an outsider who lacks the deep-rooted political experience needed to navigate the Church's complex administrative structures. Unlike Cardinal Parolin, who has spent years working in Vatican diplomacy, Tagle has focused more on pastoral work and global evangelization. Critics claim that his lack of experience in Vatican governance could make him vulnerable to internal power struggles if he were to become pope. Financial matters are another point of contention. Pope Francis has worked to bring more transparency to the Vatican's financial dealings, but not everyone supports these efforts. Some factions worry that a Tagle-led papacy would continue these reforms, potentially exposing corruption or disrupting long-standing financial networks within the Church. Despite these challenges, Tagle remains a strong contender for the papacy. However, the conservative resistance against him is real, and if he is to lead the Church, he will need to overcome fierce opposition. The battle for the future of Catholicism is far from over, and the outcome of the next papal election will determine which direction the Church takes in the coming decades. The future of the Vatican. Who will lead? As the Catholic Church stands at a crossroads, the question of who will succeed Pope Francis looms larger than ever. Will the Church continue on the progressive path that Francis has set in motion? Or will it take a more conservative turn under a leader like Cardinal Parolin? The answer will shape Catholicism for generations to come. The upcoming papal conclave will be one of the most consequential in modern history. On one side, there is a growing movement that supports a leader like Tagle, someone who represents a globalized, compassionate, and socially engaged church. On the other, there is a powerful conservative faction that seeks to restore traditional hierarchy and reinforce strict doctrinal authority. If Tagle is elected, it could mark a historic shift toward an even more decentralized and people-focused Vatican. His leadership would likely focus on expanding Catholicism's reach in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, strengthening interfaith dialogue and continuing the push for transparency within the Church. However, his election would also spark backlash from conservative bishops, potentially leading to internal conflicts over doctrine and governance. If Parolin or another traditionalist candidate wins, the Church could see a rollback of some of Francis's reforms. The focus might shift back towards strengthening institutional authority, maintaining strict adherence to doctrine, and reinforcing the Vatican's political influence. This would appeal to many within the Church's old guard, but could alienate younger and more progressive Catholics who have embraced Francis's leadership style. The decision is not just about one man, it's about the future of 1.3 billion Catholics worldwide. The next pope will determine whether the Church remains a force for modernization or retreats into its traditional roots. What do you think? Should the Church continue on the path of reform, or is it time for a return to its traditional values? Let us know in the comments below.